This is Nordschleife. It's often seen as the pinnacle of racetracks to enthusiasts everywhere, with over 20 kilometers and 10 minutes straight of high-speed driving, hard corners, and very little room for error. And I want to use it to learn. You see, I have myself a racing wheel and pedals, but most of the time nowadays they're used on trucking simulators. Don't get me wrong, I love those games, but I want to really push myself to do more racing driving. So, I'll be running the full Nordschleife loop, around 21 kilometers long, in a variety of vehicles, new and old, to kind of learn the ins and outs of racing and like general vehicle handling and that kind of thing. The rules are simple. We stay on the track when possible and make it to the end. Mistakes will happen, but as long as I can complete the race, that's the lap time I use. If I crash out, then I'll have to try again. And I am going to be doing this in BeamNG.Drive, which is a pretty well-known car simulator game that has pretty good driving physics to my understanding, so we'll be using it. Alright, the first run here is the Bishu Pessima, specifically the later models, which is more of like a kind of later Corolla kind of car. This specific trim has 122 horsepower with like a 1.8 liter, I believe, inline 4 engine. It's got an automatic gearbox, so I didn't have to worry about controlling the gears on this one, but that could be a problem. Now, being my first full run on this, it was not the best, as you can notice there. I took a pretty early hit in the wall, but it was a manageable amount. There's a decent amount of damage as a result of that, but very manageable. And going through this, long, speedy section, it gets a little slippery. I kind of test the limits of the track. Goes reasonably fast, not terribly fast though. This has a power-weight ratio of around 0.09, so it's nothing crazy, but it's not like 0. This is a very scary part of the track, because you enter it very quickly, but if you don't slow down, you are going straight into the sand and probably a wall. Overall, this was like a decent set point as far as time is concerned, but we'll get to that later. It's not a difficult to control car. It's mostly I'm unskilled, as you see. I just skid straight into the grass and had a hard time recovering from that. So these are the things that I'd want to try to learn how to avoid and get a really good feel out of the car while driving it. Once again, here took a little too much speed, cut into the grass. So this is a part of the learning curve. Now there's a bit of a skid there. That was kind of difficult to achieve given that this car is front-wheel drive. So what that tends to mean, if you don't know, when a car is front-wheel drive, the power goes to the front wheels, and that usually means there's quite a bit of understeer, especially when using power. So what that means is when you try to turn, the car kind of just goes straight. As you kind of noticed there, I was turning quite hard, but it did not quite follow that. This is another scary corner here. You have to go pretty fast into it. It's an easy place to make a mistake, but we got through it fine. Next up is a fast section, which we won't really dwell on too much. There's a lot of fast sections of this course that make it kind of scary to drive, especially since it's easy 10-minute long drive. But going towards I don't know the names of Nordschleife, like the names of the corners. I feel like this is called the rotary, I'm not entirely sure. Kind of exit out of it early, but you really want to try to be dipped into that to take advantage of the angle. Got a bit of a drift going on, but like I said, with that kind of front-wheel drive understeer, it makes it difficult for it to really slide around corners anyway like that. And I actually had another mistake here that was pretty consequential, as you'll notice that rear left wheel is kind of bent outward, so I was having to kind of constantly fight the car from this point forward in the run. Thankfully it's not terribly technical, but there are still some scary spots, such as this place here where you kind of go back and forth a bit, and you can kind of see how I'm fighting the car a bit, going over the bumps. Now, I could actually almost feel this bumper rubbing against the ground while driving, which was a very interesting experience to go through. We're approaching the sort of final straight here where the car goes pretty fast. I think it only got to around 100 miles an hour. There's like a few corners before we get there though. And you can kind of see the car is very skidding a lot. And even going into the grass some. This was an especially scary part because it started to drift towards the wall there, and I did not want to have to reset. Now we finally approach the sort of final straight area here, as you can see. This goes pretty fast. This is the camera I am using when I'm actually doing these runs. The interior camera hides the speedometer, and I can't seem to get it to unhide, so I stick with the hood camera, and it works pretty well. Approaching the final few corners here, these you kind of have to be careful because you can take the initial ones quite fast, but you have to slow down progressively more and more as you go through the following corners. And once we finally make it across the line, right about here, the line is not really marked, so yeah. As you can see, car sustained quite a bit of damage, but it was a decent run. Okay, so next up is the AW Beat. I don't know how it's pronounced. It's effectively an old Volkswagen Golf sort of replica. This thing only has 55 horsepower with a power-to-weight ratio of around 0.07, so it's a bit lower than that Passima, but it is lighter because it is much smaller. This car is also a manual and also front-wheel drive, so I had to sort of worry about managing the gears properly while driving it around. Now this car in general, because of its much lower horsepower and lower power-to-weight ratio, was not very fast, especially down straights. So we won't dwell on this run too much, but I thought it was worth mentioning this sort of very simple car. Now the brakes on this do like to lock up, as you see here, but it's a manageable amount, and this car can't go fast enough for that to be a problem. It did sometimes like to get squirrely, after all, it being a smaller car, and the brakes locking up especially means in the middle of turning it would like to swing around a bit, or as you see there, especially if you're in a banked turn, it will start to sort of twist into that, which requires some work to keep under control. You'll notice that there is a lot of tire squealing during this run. I think that's just the nature of the car in essence. Now on this rotary section, kind of lost it halfway through, unfortunately, but yeah. Skipping quite a ways ahead here through a lot of straights sections. Like I said, it's not very fast, which does mean it's a very easily controlled car, at least. But it also means that, you know, it's not that interesting of a run. You know, I'm not sending it sideways through every other corner, essentially. Now this sort of section was the scariest part because I almost sent it into a wall. Started to drift there, then took a little too much speed and just went straight. Thankfully that sand trap was enough wiggle room to get through it. And as we approach the final straight, I think this car only really struggled to even get up to 100 miles an hour, because this course has a lot of up and downhill segments which really make low power cars struggle. And as we get to the finish here, very, very uneventful, pretty not stressful. It is kind of nice to drive a fairly simple car, but you know, higher power things are more interesting and require more skill as we finish across the line there. Now the next vehicle is called the Reton Median. It is effectively modeled over a Dodge Intrepid, which is just a very 2000s car, I'd say. It has a 3.3 liter engine, puts out 188 horsepower, so quite fast. It's front wheel drive, automatic, so you know it runs into those issues. Now you may notice the rear suspension. I think this mod might be a bit out of date, so the rear suspension is extremely bouncy. It kind of went out wide on that corner there, and it often caused me some problems because it would bounce so aggressively that it made it rather unstable. But I mean, still got through it. There's a lot of body roll on this as well, which means it's throwing a lot of its weight around. You hit the wall there, which is unfortunate. Not too much damage, thankfully, but you know, not ideal. Through the lawn straight section, it is decently fast. I think it struggled a lot despite its higher horsepower to go uphill here. A lot of vehicles seem to struggle on that part. Through this little rotary section, once again we see that squishy suspension all over the place. There almost seems to be some I think it's negative camber when it's tilted in on those rear wheels. I don't know what's up with that. It does drive decently though. Certainly the higher power does help it get around corners quite quickly. It does like to squeal its tires on some corners, as you can hear, and there's that squishy suspension throwing it around. It's like it has rear leaf springs with no dampeners on it. I used to own a truck that had leaf springs on the back, and yeah, those get really bouncy. I wonder, it probably does have leaf springs, if I'm honest. Now that automatic suspension, or the automatic gearbox does hurt it a lot of times, because what you'll have is you'll be slowing down, but the automatic gearbox doesn't want to shift down. So when you're trying to accelerate to go faster, it stays very slow and hasn't kicked down a gear, so you kind of lose a lot of power in that slushiness of an automatic that is kind of resolved with a manual. And as we make it across the line here, pretty solid run actually, despite the extremely squishy suspension in the back. Now the final vehicle I have for you today is the Moonhawk. Specifically, it is a 309 V8 sedan. It's got a 309 V8 in it. This one's manual. I don't think I mentioned this before, but I use an automatic clutch because I have not quite learned the hand-eye-foot coordination in order to make that work. It's something I would like to do eventually, but I don't have a gear shifter. I have paddle shifters, so you know. Now this one is rear-wheel drive, so it's I think the only rear-wheel drive run on this set of runs. It likes to. It's very fun to throw around the corners, as you can see there. It likes to flick out just a bit. It doesn't have a lot of power, only 181 horsepower, which is just barely less than the median as we go very fast down this straight. Of course, that powerful V8 does let it get some decent speed. Once again, the Moonhawk has a very squishy suspension. There's a lot of body roll you might notice even through here. There it is, throwing its rear end around, which is quite fun for a car to do that when you can kind of control it, especially with the wheel. It's really fun to be able to like throw a car around a bit and then be able to correct it, because you can't exactly do that in real life safely. This car is, I think it's like a mid-70s era model. It's kind of just modeled over the 70s era kind of... It's not quite a full-on muscle car, I don't know. It's kind of a weird car in the game. There's no ABS on this, so you have to be very careful not to lock the brakes, so you can't, like, slam it all the way. You have to be very careful not to lock them, otherwise you will just kind of skid straight forward. But the fact that it's rear-wheel drive means it can kind of put a lot of that power down easier sometimes. It doesn't have to deal with... you can even hear the brakes overheating, speaking of, because they're very old brakes, they did start to overheat at points. Something else I'll mention, I don't think I mentioned this for the Reton, but this has a power-to-weight ratio of around 0.08, so it's a little less than the Pessima we saw earlier. The Reton had a 0.11, which is the highest of these four, actually. Overall, this is a very, very fun car to drive, I feel. It's the first rear-wheel drive of this sort of experiment, if you will, of trying to learn how to drive cars fast in using a sim racing wheel. You'll often hear a lot of tire squealing as I try to put the power down when I can. Being able to control the gearbox manually is really nice too, because like I mentioned, and we saw a bit of an unsettlement there. That's the risk with rear-wheel drive cars at this age. It can kind of, if you do it wrong, you can lose control of the vehicle very easily. We actually hit it again there because I think I overjudged how fast I could take that corner. But the damage is by and large cosmetic. It didn't really affect the handling too hard. Spit out some sand as we go through that corner. The grip on this is not great either, just because they're kind of older. They're standard tires, I believe, so you know, we don't have any improved grip in the tires, really. Ooh, throwing it around a little bit there. This vehicle doesn't quite have enough power to like power slide, where you can kind of throw the back out, but then be able to like keep it out, like what you would do with like a drift. It's just a little too sluggish of an engine to do that. As we make it through the final corners here, you know, pretty fun, honestly. I don't know if it's necessarily the fastest, but it's a very fun car to drive. And I don't know, I just like the shape of the Moonhawk. It's always been one of my favorite cars in the game, despite it being very old, and I don't think it's gotten a refresh yet. So, looking forward to when that comes. But yeah. Alright, looking at the final times of these four cars here. In first place we have that Reton Median with the 10-minute 45-second time, followed by the Moonhawk with about 11 minutes even. Pessima, another 25 seconds after that, and then the little Volkswagen thing just a few seconds after the Pessima. If you have any other cars you would like to see in the future, see me try to send around the track, please let me know, and I hope you enjoyed.